Welcome back. I'm doing well. John, this is twice within a 2 weeks period of time that we will have been talking, so I'm psyched. I don't usually
One of
get
those
that much.
times.
We don't usually get to see that much of you so frequently on the Glim Show.
It's
We
been a good
are,
couple weeks.
it has been. So I'm Glenn Loury of Brown University, and speaking with my interlocutor, conversation partner here at Blogging Heads, John McWhorter of Columbia University. And this is part two of a conversation we began last 10 days ago or so that's gone up on the site about the Black Lives Matter movement and the contemporary racial politics in the United States. It's one of our beats. We've been talking about this kind of stuff for years. We want to pick up where we left off. We got some critical comments in the comment section at the bloggingheads.tv site of people who feel that we're naysayers, that we're curmudgeons, that all we're doing is criticizing. We don't have anything constructive to say, that, we're coming down on Black Lives Matter. And moreover, in the time that has intervened between our previous conversation and this one, the McWhorter Foundation has announced the winners of its MacArthur Prize Fellowship, the so-called Genius Award, one a recipient of which this time around is one Ta-Nehisi Coates, author of Between the World and Me, writer at The Atlantic, African-American social critic, who's been very prominent of late and who has come in for some criticism by us here at this site. So, John, it seems like we are facing something of a challenge here. The world would appear not to agree with us about these matters. And with me being in my 60s, man, I'm starting to feel like I'm out of touch. I'm just getting old. It's, the situations are moving past me. You're a younger man, so you've still got your bright future ahead of you. But help me out, John. Are we crazy over here? Where do we go wrong? How come we're not with the zeitgeist, man? What's wrong with us?
We're not crazy. What we're seeing with our dispute with people on Black Lives Matter is that at heart, there are a great many people who feel like what they really want to do, what's most important to do, is to fight racism. And so what they want to do, what jumps to their mind as important and urgent, is to get these white cops to stop killing black people. And I support that effort wholeheartedly. And nobody could say that I don't. I have now written a long string of pieces in national media all over the place for several years supporting those efforts. I'm not just making some backhanded compliment when really I'm concerned with something else. But when it comes to all of that getting the kind of traction that it is, I firmly believe that a real Black Lives movement that was concerned about helping black people, not helping people, outside of the black community or black people outside of poor black communities feel good about themselves. Helping black communities. The idea that you focus on what the cops are doing when what they do to black people is something they do much less than certain black people in those neighborhoods are doing to one another doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of our critics are thinking really deep down, but if you talk about those black guys in the neighborhood, well, that's not racism. Or that's the result of racism, although that's a very weak argument. But really, no, I say no. Remember, the idea is not to only battle racism, because racism today isn't the only cause of the problems in those communities. You should do both. It's not to leave the cops alone, but the whole movement should be about stopping black lives from being taken unjustly. And in closing, I'll say, and I think I mentioned this analogy to you the other day, and you said you didn't like it, but I still kind of like it. It's like some people say, well, that's like telling somebody they shouldn't fight litter because there's also hunger. No, the analogy is off. It's like watching somebody who says, I'm going to fight litter, but they only seem to be picking up soda cans. And you say, well, what about all this other stuff? And they say, well, no, the soda cans are shiny and, well, they make noise when they hit the ground. I'm going to get the soda cans. And, well, what's wrong with me just concentrating on this? And you say, well, I thought what you wanted to do was pick up litter. Why don't you go get those diapers and the garbage bags and the wilted lettuce? No, I'm just going to get the cans. Why do you have to get on me for doing what I'm doing? It's the same thing. That's where we are. I stand by what I've been saying. How do you feel about this?
Oh, John. Okay, so I'm tired. That's one thing that I feel. To be perfectly honest with you, I think I may have announced a couple of years ago in one of my Blogging Heads conversations that I was going global. And, you know, I was going to be more interested in South Asia, and economic development in Africa, and, you know, race and religion in Europe. And, you know, I was going to go global and sort of free myself from the endless, tiresome, repetitive, humiliating, frustrating, quote, conversation, close quote, about race in America. I've said everything I have to say. Y'all either want to hear it or you don't. Sounds like the plurality don't, at least the plurality that hands out the prizes and such. And so, therefore, you know, man, time to move on. It's kind of how I felt. And that was 2-3 years ago, and I haven't moved on yet. I guess I can't move on. I guess, you know, I'm stuck caring about the situation. I'm stuck with, you know, 4 decades of intellectual labor, you know, on and around the edges of this problem. I'm stuck having laid down markers, you know. I mean, I think the self-help argument, a version which I think you kind of just made, now, I don't want to tar you with that brush, but I still think it has a lot to say about it, about African-American agency, about cleaning up our act, about restoring the family, about morality and, you know, and virtue and things like that. I mean, I know they're old-fashioned words. I still think they have relevance. I still think in terms of the enemy without, which is white racism, and I'm against it just like you are. I'm against police brutality and abusive, unaccountable use of force against black people just like you are, have said so many times. Was 2 or 3 years ahead of Michelle Alexander in blasting mass incarceration and its racial disparity impact. Yeah. I was years ahead of the curve on that issue. I'm supposed to be a black conservative. How come I'm standing up in front of the Tanner Lecture audience at Stanford University decrying the racist implications of the structure of punishment and crime reaction in our country that had tacit, if not explicit, racism written all over it? I said that, said it once, said it twice, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm weary. I'm weary of a world in which you can't raise a question about the efficacy of affirmative action without a ton of bricks falling on you. I'm weary. I'm weary of a world in which you point out 50 years after the civil rights movement that people are still recycling the same arguments with the same excuses for the same unacceptable conditions and unacceptable behavior. I'm weary of trying to defend the humanity and the integrity of, quote, my people, close quote, by calling on liberals to stop making excuses for our failures and start asking of us, as they would of anybody in this society, to live by a set of standards and a code that affirms our humanity and that is consistent with a normative consensus. You know, I'm tired of defending America as a nation that is susceptible to reform, notwithstanding its racist history. I'm just weary. I'm tired. And finally, I'll say, because I know I'm going on, thank you for listening, John, I'm hurt. I'm hurt by being passed over, by being tacitly and explicitly dissed. I'm hurt by being right, in my opinion, about a lot of stuff and not being recognized as such. I'm hurt by the fact that my accomplishments, and I'm not the one to make this speech, I should not be the one to have to make this speech, my accomplishments as a scholar, as a teacher, as a writer, as a social critic, as an intellectual, as a technical economist, tower over the accomplishments of some people who've gotten a lot more play than I have in this field, which is so important to my country. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm shrugging, I'm befuddled. You know, I look around and I don't get it. And like I say, being a man of a certain age, I'm starting to think maybe I'll never get it. Maybe it's passed me by. Maybe, you know, my time has come and gone. I don't know. I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. And if I sound like I'm feeling sorry for myself, it's probably because I am.
No,
there you are, John. You asked me and I told you.
No, I get it. I can put myself in your head. I can imagine. And I mean, and I'm not... You know, I'm actually turning 50 on Tuesday. I'm imagining if I had been around for 10 years and more than that, and kind of feeling like I had done my life's body work, and it seems like, you know, certain other types of people are getting the fancy awards. And you know, Glenn, this isn't going to help you, I imagine, but to tell you the truth, I was a humble linguist. And then in the year 2000, rather accidentally, I started being known as what used to be called a raceman. Ever since then, I've done those two things. But I realized about 5 years in that to have the kinds of views about race that I have, there's I guess you call it a sort of glass ceiling. I thought, if by some chance I was amazing, that was never going to be acknowledged, because the best you can do as somebody like you or me is for people to say that you make some good points. But for the vast majority, the plurality of people, as you put it, that's the best that we can ever do. It couldn't be that you're just right. Nobody, no matter how well you did, a Tony Scott in the Times would not say that anything you wrote was quote unquote essential like air, the way he did about Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. It just couldn't happen. I think it's partly, now, that's not to say that I ever thought I did anything that was absolutely amazing, but it was clear to me that I could never be acknowledged as having done such a thing because of the religion where everybody feels that their duty is to decry racism. And so the best it can be is that you make some good points. And I frankly think that you were considered somebody who absolutely, excellently, quote unquote, makes some good points. But I think that the kind of person who gives out those prizes, who says those certain things, who anoints you, that kind of person, it would never occur to them to put you on that kind of list. And so for me, I have always kept the linguistics too. And I enjoy it, and I frankly get a certain kind of attention in linguistics that I will never get when it comes to race. And many people would say, well, that's because your race stuff is wrong. But I think you and I know that that's a rather hasty judgment. But yeah, I would at 50 already feel exactly like you. I would feel, I'm working hard, I'm more prolific than a lot of these people, I think I'm more original than a lot of these people, and yet they get A, B, and C, and all I am is somebody who makes some good points. Yes, I feel you. That must be extremely frustrating, because you know that what you have to do is stand outside of it all and evaluate yourself. But let's face it, that alone doesn't always get you through the night. I hear you. It's true, but we're up against something that we can't fight. I stopped giving live race talks in 2008 because I just thought I'm not going to travel anymore into a situation. Nobody was hurting me or yelling at me, but I just thought the best I can do is you make some good points. That's it. No matter how empirical I am, you make some good points. And I just thought I'm going to do live talks on something where every now and then somebody tells me I'm amazing. And that was the language. Is there any way that you could do that? Like really step away and just do, say, pure economics as an alternate, instead of stepping into somewhere where everybody in the room is primed to think that, say, Ta-Nehisi Coates is the dead center of empirical reality, and then anything you say is just some good points?
Well, yeah, John, there is, and I do. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I teach PhD students in economics. I teach them pure mathematical economic theory. We, go through the canon of what it is that a well-trained professional economist should know, largely based on the work of Nobel Prize-winning scholars in the last quarter century, many of whom are my friends and colleagues, some of whom I've collaborated with. I have a life. I go give lectures all over the world on my research. I do also give lectures, indeed, all over the world about race and social policy in America. There's no necessary inconsistency between the two. Come on, there's no way for a person to listen to us here and not think, sour grapes, these guys are grousing because,
Of course, right.
whatever, they're just jealous of the success of somebody, whatever, they're self-important academics, you've heard these comments, you've seen these remarks. And I suppose to a certain degree there is some sour grapes running around here. There is a little bit of resentment and a little bit of, disappointment and whatnot. Don't want to seem too self-important, given that the things we're talking about, poverty and, segregated ghettos and, hundreds of thousands of people incarcerated and millions of people not developing their human potential to the fullest because they've been betrayed and let down by the politics and institutions of the country that they were born in. These are serious things. Our lives, are pretty cushy, we're well into the middle class, we're secure, We have liberty to pursue our intellectual interests. We get rewarded for doing things that we probably do in our spare time if we weren't even being paid for it. We travel the world. So at some level, there's nothing. If my old Christian, sensibilities were to kick in, I'd just be grateful, thanking God for what He's doing for me every day, and not looking over my shoulder and all of that. So I don't know, maybe this is enough about me. Yes, I have a life outside of racial commentary. I do.
Now you're getting me thinking about this sort of thing. Go ahead.
I'm a fellow of the Econometric Society. I think I've already said that. I'm a member of the American Philosophical Society. There are only a couple of thousand of us in the world. I think I've already noted that. Have been vice president of the American Economics Association. Got students that win McWhorter Prize fellowships. People that I taught much of what they know, who've gone on to be acknowledged and honored in this way. I don't think I have anything really to be crying in my beer about.
Do you think that those big name prizes are that important? I really never have thought about them much, but you're now making me think about it. But how come it has to be the MacArthur or the National Book Award? Why that particular imprimatur, as opposed to just being somebody who's well known, constantly asked to speak, etc.? Is that not enough? For me, it usually is.
Yeah, I think it had better be enough. For the fact is that almost nobody's going to win those prizes. They're only giving out one a year, so to speak. And so a lot of good people are going to be left off the list. Not every brilliant economist who's made fundamental contributions will be honored with the Nobel Prize, and not every writer who writes a book that's very much worth reading and will be worth reading in a quarter century is going to be honored with a National Book Award. It had better be enough to do your work and make a contribution, even if you're not recognized at the highest level like that. On the other hand, I think those prizes make a difference. First of all, they're handing out real money over there at the MacArthur Foundation. I don't know about you, but $500,000 in my bank account would actually make a difference in my life. Secondly, it gives you cachet. Most people are not sufficiently informed about the internal, sort of rankings of accomplishment. They're not sufficiently well trained in the specialized areas of inquiry to be able to evaluate and so forth. So they go by the label. And when you get one of those labels, and if the label is genius, slapped on you, it changes your life. You get more speaking invitations. You get an easier reception at the editorial office for the piece that you may have submitted. Your name gets mentioned, and people say, "Oh yeah, he won the Genius Award last year or 3 years ago, whatever." So I would like to think that probably does make a difference.
I guess one thing that immunizes me from that sort of thing is that I guess I'm kind of a dilettante who's always doing a bunch of different things. I wouldn't want any more speaking invitations. I get exactly as many as I need. I wouldn't. The life of some of these scholars, where they spend their lives in airplanes and in hotel rooms, jumping all over the place, I genuinely wouldn't want it. I like my stuff, and I'm really tired of airplanes. But I see what you mean. Far be it from me to give advice on this, because now you struck a chord. I'm thinking about myself at 50, and where even at 50 you begin to think, is this it? And I'm pretty sure that I'm at it. And is it enough? Something like that.
So now let's get down to cases. Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay? He is the ghost lurking in this conversation because he just won a MacArthur Prize Fellowship Genius Award with the $600K that comes along with it and all the cachet, and he's riding very high. His book has been on the top of the bestseller list for a while. I don't believe any of your books have been on the top of the bestseller list for any such period of time, and I can tell you for a fact that none of mine have ever gotten on the bestseller list.
I will have you know that Losing the Race was number 28 on the New York Times bestseller list for about 10 seconds, and the bottom half of the list isn't published, and so nobody knew. But that is the closest I think I will ever get to that. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so if you're riding high on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, number 1, 2, 3, and if you're up there for a couple of months, you're selling hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of copies of a text, and you're getting, you're getting royalties of, I don't know, depends on the contract and whatnot, but it could be $3, $4, $5 a pop. You understand? Anybody can do that arithmetic. That ain't nothing. Moreover, you become the person who frames the conversation in the editorial boardrooms, in the corporate boardrooms, in the community activist meetings. Your text becomes influential in a very deep way. It resonates in the lives and in the minds of people. You become a household word. You become the go-to person. These are all very, very, very good things, no? So, you know, again, the question I'm moved to ask is, if the world is rewarding something that you and I are so sharply critical of, doesn't that kind of tell us that there's something wrong with us? And if the answer to that is no, then we're left with the problem of explaining why the world is crazy and we're so smart. You know, in economics, they have this thing, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Maybe it's not just economics. Maybe that's a Jewish proverb or something. I'm not sure what the origins of it are. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? You know?
Yeah.
Well, if you're so smart, why don't you have the prize? If you're so smart, why aren't people buying your books in the bushel load?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I still haven't read the book, but I have read many, many reviews. I am fascinated by the phenomenon from a distance, and it's at the point where I've read so many quotes and things that I almost feel like I've read it.
You probably ought to read the book, John. Did you hear what I said? I said you probably ought to read the book.
Yeah, I know I ought to, but I have a big stack.
Okay. All right.
But also,
all right.
I have a policy on Coates, which is that and I've had this for many, many years, good 7, 8 years. I don't talk about him at all. However, I'll make an exception here, as I did with one other conversation with you, because it is at the point where one cannot not talk about him at all. And I'll just say that where that book is it's anthropologically interesting to me, because what all of this says is that things are much better than he is claiming in that book and in his last 2 particularly noted magazine articles. Because I think that the view of race in that book, anybody can see, is Manichaean. He's exaggerating. He's talking about an America that has not existed for a very long time. It's extremely subjective. Everybody knows. However, the fact that everybody of influence, and especially white people of influence, are bowing down to it and thinking of it as something that needs to be part of the conversation, although nobody seems to specify just how it's going to be part or what purposes it'll serve, but it's going to be part of the conversation. That means that something really seismic has happened in the social fabric of this country, not with every white person alive, but it's actually something to be joyous about. The pendulum has swung a little too far, but it'll come back to reality. But the thing that strikes me the most about that book, there's a passage about how he is in Harlem and he doesn't like when the young white couples with the big carriages are taking up space on the sidewalk. He sees dominance in it. He's got a passage where he sees his son frolicking with, the non-black kids at school, and internally he says to himself, wait, you can't know what those people might do to you. You don't know what they might have in store. That, and then the comment that he's made to the media that he's surprised white people even care about his work. I hypothesize, I don't know the man, but I hypothesize that Ta-Nehisi Coates is the kind of black person who, when white people aren't around, says, I don't like white people. That's just my guess. And it's not only my guess, but it comes from the book that he wrote. That's a book written by somebody who has a major beef against white people, and not just in some abstract collective way, such that he sees 2 white people who probably read his stuff walking down the street in Harlem with a carriage and thinks of them as Vikings who were dominating space, as white people always do. I find it interesting that the sort of people who he clearly doesn't like adore the book. I wonder if they know that he doesn't like them either. I think they might think that he doesn't like the firefighter and the working class white person who's on the bar stool and doesn't understand what's going on with the blacks. I wonder if they realize that it's a fair reading that really he just doesn't like white people in general because of America's past and present, and that they are indicted as well. Maybe they feel goodly in supporting their own indictment, which is the basis for my whole religious comment about all this. That's where that book is in my mind at this point. I
Okay,
have
John.
spoken of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now you speak of him.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to speak of John McWhorter for a moment, or at least about what you just said. Doesn't like white people. Okay, so you impute this to him. You don't really know. We don't know what he actually thinks. In a way, it's kind of maybe a little unfair to be speculating about somebody's state of mind in the absence of evidence. Okay, so there is some anecdotal evidence based upon passages in the book and so forth and so on. I don't know. I mean, here's what I'd say about Coates and white people from my reading of the book. I don't know Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'd say his beef is with whiteness. His beef is with people who need to think of themselves as white. Okay. The indictment that I take from the book is with the very notion or category of whiteness as a privileged category of people who are sort of unreflectively the beneficiaries of a structure that advantages them and disadvantages people of color, and who in some sense, retreat behind their whiteness or something. I may not do justice to this argument here, but in any case, it's whiteness. Now, white people, okay, you can point to some of those anecdotes. I heard them too. I mean, read them also, saw them in the book. But
yeah, Glenn, just very quickly, you read it. Do you also get the sense that he would be that kind of person who would say, I don't like white people? Not whiteness in that modern abstract way, but just that. I mean, and we can't know.
He might. I mean, this is your speculation. I'm not necessarily joining you in it in the sense that. I don't want to say no. I don't want to say no to you because, there is a certain kind of racialist romanticization. I mean, of Howard University in his years there and stuff like that. He talks about the beauty of black people and all of that. I mean, he's, does that add up to not liking white people? It may add up to loving yourself. Loving black people in the face in the face of a world that hates us would be perhaps the way he might put it.
Exactly. Right.
But I've said this. Harold Pollack and I discussed this book a few weeks ago here at the Glenn Show, and I agree with you about the Manichaean view. I mean, it's a world of black and white, of good and evil. And whiteness and white people and white America are evil. It's a world in which black people have been sold a bill of goods, this American dream. I find it profoundly ironic. Here is Ta-Nehisi Coates living the very American dream that he doesn't believe exists.
Well, remember, he thinks he's an exception. Right.
Well,
he'll say, I got lucky, but you have to think about everybody who doesn't get as lucky as me.
No, but your point is well taken, and I say this vis-a-vis the Black Lives Matter thing also. America is capable of reform. To a degree, yeah. This is not a society that is so corrupt, bankrupt, self-indulgent, oblivious to its own character, incapable of self-criticism, that it can't reform itself. Quite the contrary. And the bandwagon that builds around indictments such as those at issue from Ta-Nehisi Coates is evidence of the capacity of the society to reform. I'll end this. I'll end this with the observation that the very mass incarceration that people are pointing to as clear-cut evidence of the racist character of the society and its contempt for black bodies is being undone. Even as we speak, it's early on. I don't know what the future will bring, but I'm darn sure that there are movements afoot across the political spectrum involving white people as well as black people that are dead set to try to roll this thing back. I've seen conservative Republicans financed by the Koch brothers stand up and at length with tears in their eyes preach against and decry the cul-de-sac that we've wandered into in terms of excessive punishment and its racial disparity. This country is certainly capable of reform. The civil rights movement proves that. So the elevation of Barack Hussein Obama proves that. I mean, no, it doesn't erase all the racism. No, I didn't say we were living in a post-racial society. What I said is the society is not so bankrupt, corrupt, and bereft of the capacity for reflection and self-criticism that these things can't change. They're worth engaging with, these white people, And these issues
Mm-hmm.
are worth fighting with coalitions that are broader than simply people of color. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
if anybody is obsessed with race, it's my man Ta-Nehisi Coates who's obsessed with race. He imagines that every white people looks at him and the first thing they see is a black person. I'm almost certain that that's not true. What I'm certain of, however, is that every white person he sees, the first thing he sees is a white person. All right, John, you've drawn me down there into the gutter with you. I'm attacking my man Ta-Nehisi Coates. But yeah, I think there's some problems there.
We don't know him. We don't know him, and I should underline that I'm just guessing, and I should also say that if he doesn't like white people, there's a reason that is understandable. I'm not saying that he's a racist in the same way as a white person is a racist, and this is a bad thing. I mean, I can see where he would get it, although I think that there is this Manichaeanism in his general worldview. But still, it's there. And one more thing. Talk about getting each other down.
John, excuse me for interrupting, John. The comment section is going to eat us alive. I just want you to know that. Brace yourself.
I'm
brace
I'm
yourself.
Sure. This is the world we live in. When I was about eight, I went to a Montessori school, which was quintessential Montessori school. Although I imagine there was some sort of effort to bring in socioeconomically disadvantaged kids. I was too young to know, but there were a lot. Comparatively for a Montessori school, a lot of black kids who were not from as middle class homes as I was. That was great. That was there. Anyway, there was one family of kids like that where they had an older brother, and I imagine he was in his 20s, maybe even his 30s, and he came and he visited one day. And these people were, I guess, they lived in something like poverty. And actually, one of the girls was my first quote-unquote girlfriend, to show you that I knew these people. I mean, we were friends. But the brother came, and this is somebody, he was kind of from the hood, as people would have started saying later. And I was told that he had not enjoyed his visit. He didn't like the school in terms of what was going on with the black kids at it, like me, because he thought that we were playing too happily with the white kids, and we didn't realize that life wasn't going to be the way it was at that school. And he was disgusted. He really couldn't stand watching the black kids running around with the white kids as if everything was fine. And I remember back then, and of course I was just a kid, I remember thinking, I don't like that. I think that he's living in the world of the past. I already had a sense that there had been a revolution of some kind, and I thought, he doesn't understand that things are changing. I don't believe that my relationships with these white kids are false, and that at a certain point they're going to turn against me as a little nigger. I think that this guy is caught in something, and I kind of resent that he has contempt for my happy life in seeing me running around with a multi-hued bunch of people. And I must admit that I see some of that in a view of life where here in, say, New York in 2015, all these people around us are white and, unintentionally malevolent, and to be comfortable with them because, yes, I am. My wife is quite white, and my social life is about 55% white. The idea that that's all a sham and that I don't understand that really these are the same people who in a different mood are going to shove my daughters on an escalator, it gives me a feeling that I can't say is the most positive one. But you're only getting me thinking about that. Ordinarily, my statement is just the one about the not liking white people. But yeah, you got me talking. So that.
Well,
Are you mad at him?
At Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Mm-hmm.
No, man, I'm not. I'm not mad at him. I mean, I am in disagreement with him about some things. I'm not exactly sure the full extent of the disagreement. I'm actually interested in engaging him. Come on the Glenn Show, Ta-Nehisi, let's talk. I'm interested in engaging him around some of these questions where I think there are arguments worth having. I might be mad at the world who loves him and seems not to love me nearly as much. But, mad is not a very constructive posture, man. That's not a place one wants to dwell. I think one wants to push back against that kind of a feeling. But Just on this point about racial boundaries and so on, I do think I would not advise my son, as Coates has advised his, to the effect, don't drink the Kool-Aid, don't relax, don't get comfortable, watch out, the world hates you, it's coming to get you because you're black. I mean, I would not tell my son in the wake of a grand jury declining to indict police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, see there, one more proof that we don't count. No such thing. I wouldn't cultivate in my son, looking forward to the middle of the 21st century, the attitude that pigmentation is an absolutely defining line of demarcation in this society, and you're always going to be on the short end of it. And I wonder if one tells one's child that, what one would think if they came home with a girlfriend or a prospective spouse who is, as you say, quite white. what they would think about bridging. I mean, because this is intimacy. Now, here we are making babies together. Here we are planning a life together. Okay? Surely it's got to be right that if there's going to ultimately be a solution to the racial problem in this country, it will involve not only this, but it will intimately involve an expansion of the extent of interracial intimacy, cohabitation, marriage, and reproduction as people's lives blend together. And this line gets, to be partly and progressively erased, just as the line between Catholic and Protestant, between Irish and English, between German, Slavic and all of that, Italian, Jewish, has been progressively diminished in American society over the course of the 20th century. Surely that's what we have to hope for. So there's something, I'm not mad at him, but I mean, I think very wrong-headed about the direction that he pushes us, which so many influential people, like the prize awarders at the McWhorter Foundation, seem willing to follow.
It's interesting, I guess, 999 readers out of 1,000 of that book would never dream of telling their child something like this, or would disapprove of the idea of any black child being taught to grow up that way. I think it's a rather open and shut case, but I think that people are reading this book and looking at that message, and I think the good white person's job is to shake their head and say, yeah, look how bad it is that he feels the need to tell his son that. Look how bad it is. And if you've shaken your head and you say, look how bad it is, that means that you understand that racism isn't gone, and you have done what many people do consider the most important moral act that an American can do, which is to say racism isn't gone and it's serious. And that can genuinely translate into people judging a piece of work to be significant and even genius level. That's what I mean by we can't think of it. And I said this at the end of the second to last Blogging Heads we did. It's not that it's to be read as facts. It's not that it's even to be read as argument. Yeah. It's scripture. Nobody puts it that way. We don't use that word, but it's scripture. And that just makes it easy to me, although I do understand your frustration, because we don't always use the words as precisely as we might. The vocabulary doesn't fit the phenomenon, so we don't call it scripture. We call it a book. But, it actually makes more sense as the scripture.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to have to go in a minute, or else I'm going to miss lunch. And
you have lunch?
That's enough. Yeah, I have a lunch that they serve at a specific hour here. But what I want to say is, as my last contribution, the functional equivalent from the white side of the way in which race gets talked about in Between the World and Me would be somebody telling their child, after he picks up the newspaper and sees a black criminal who's, raped or robbed or preyed upon somebody who's white, telling their kid, you see there, you can't turn your back on these people. Every time we look up, one of them is doing something horrible to us, and then going on with the racist rant that person would go on with. And, of course, we recognize that immediately as profoundly morally wrong, and the miseducation of that child. Okay. Well, I would like to say it's not the same thing, but it's a functional equivalent. That telling a black kid that America is bankrupt, don't believe any of these promises, the dream is a nightmare. It's going to come back to bite you. Don't trust them. I have to protect you from a world that hates you because you're black. While this kid may not have the same power that a white kid would have to, perpetrate wrongful deeds on the basis of such a way of looking at the world, it is still, nevertheless, a wrongful way of looking at the world. That's what I would say.
We could go many places from there, and so maybe there's a to be continued. But yeah, there are many levels to these issues, and I think that somebody like Coates would agree with you in a way. Although, of course, the idea is that his view is reactive, whereas the white person who would say this is supposed to understand that the white person created any of the behavior that might make them uncomfortable. Yeah. There's a piece by John Derbyshire that actually pretty much is what you said, that came out 2 or 3 years ago and created a big fuss. Yes, you are correct, but these sorts of discussions are not what creates the estimation of books like Coates's. We're approaching it in what I think is almost the wrong way. And there it is.
John, I got to go or else I'll be hungry. Okay. Thanks, John. We're going to take a beating on this, though. You know that, though, right?
Well, I'm used to it. That's okay.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.